Hello everyone, and welcome to the 276th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Mole. If you're a fan of my videos, consider signing up to become a patron over on Patreon, where you can get access to my videos a day early, ad-free, and uncensored for as low as $2 a month. A while back, I was fortunate enough to be contacted by the creators of Mole, Off Black Creations, and they gave me early access to their new psychological horror game to see if it was something I'd be interested in making a video on. And well, you can tell that I definitely was interested. Mole is what you'd get if Mouthwashing an Iron Lung had a baby, and as a game that's very reminiscent of those entries in a lot of ways, it's a fantastic dive into claustrophobic and puzzling horror that had me thinking about it for days after I finished it. And after putting all that thought into it, I think I've managed to figure out just what's going on in this fantastic story. That being said, this video is going to be both an analysis as well as an explanation of the story of Mole. And with Mole releasing only just yesterday on Steam, it's safe to say that there will be a lot of spoilers in this video for anyone who hasn't played it yet. But if you haven't, go ahead and head over to Steam and pick up Mole for yourself. One more thing before we get started. Bear in mind that this game contains some flashing lights that I may have included in this video, just so you're aware. Now without further ado, let's begin. The loss of a loved one, especially a child, is one of the heaviest burdens any person can bear. The man we pilot in this game, Viktor Kaminsky, is one such person. Viktor is a citizen of the Socialist People's Republic of Nevriska, which in this alternate version of our own world is analogous to the Soviet Union. Born in 1939, Viktor Kaminsky would follow in his father Taras Kaminsky's footsteps and become a geonaut, specifically a navigator for the Strata mining and energy conglomerate. After studying at the Strata Institute in the early 60s, Viktor would earn his degree in engineering and boring in 1962, becoming thereafter a navigator in the employ of the Strata conglomerate. However, it would seem that Viktor followed in his father's footsteps because he was pushed into doing so, and not because he wanted to, as the scant few mentions of Viktor's father were given imply that their relationship was a negative one. When we're shown a wall of fame of sorts featuring previous Strata navigators, the only one that doesn't have a portrait in its frame, nor a quote attributed to that person, is Taras Kaminsky. And considering these portraits are only an illusion conjured up by Viktor's mind, which we'll get into later, the fact that his father has essentially been blocked from his memory is telling of how he views him. But there are a few other indicators we're given that supports this idea. In an offer of enlistment letter Viktor received in December of 1978 from Stepan Adamenko, his friend, colleague, and future captain, Stepan remarks that he understands why Viktor refused their offer at that time, with part of the reason being that he knows Viktor and his father never saw eye to eye. The last bit we're given about Viktor's relationship with his father is through Petro's memories, where we learn that before Taras went on his final mission, that mission being the one Viktor rejected, he came to visit his son and grandson. And here, Viktor and Taras look sad and angry together from Petro's perspective, which could partly be because of the influence Taras had over his grandson, as because Viktor despised his profession and his father as a result, he was also wary of his influence over his own son and his future, who he hoped wouldn't become a geonaut like him, as we learn through a birthday letter he wrote to him. So all of these indicators point to Viktor having a less than ideal relationship with his father, and likely his profession, due to his father sending him down a path he never truly wanted to tread. But another reason why Viktor wasn't so keen on being a geonaut was likely because of the realities of the profession and how disappointing that reality was. Like so many things that powerful organizations or entities wish to glamorize for the sake of deceiving people, the geonaut profession was heavily propagandized by Strata to make it seem as if it was some awe-inspiring endeavor laden with fun and adventure that one could undertake for the glory of their nation, which we can see through the various propaganda posters strewn throughout the M13, the vessel that serves as the primary setting for this story. But in reality, being a geonaut is about as fulfilling as being a submariner, as the drills made by Strata are cramped, dismal, and run-down machines that are as depressing as they are stress-inducing, with your only comforts being ample supplies of beer, cigarettes, canned rations, playing cards, and tapes that you've likely watched 100 times over. So Viktor's professional life was a disappointment on all fronts, but fortunately for him, that didn't matter too much. As for Viktor, his joy in life was found through his son. Viktor was once a married man, but sometime after his son's birth, he and his wife divorced, or she passed away. As in another of Petro's memories, he asked his father about the mother he's never known, and in response, Viktor becomes melancholic and offers no reply. As sad as the memory of his wife makes him, the presence of his son is still a source of joy for Viktor, so much so that everything he does is done for his son, and everything he is defined by his fatherhood. So it makes sense then that when Victor was offered the opportunity to embark on another mission for Strada, he refused, not just because he despised his profession, but because he didn't want to be away from his son or put himself in any danger that might then take him away from his son permanently. But that didn't matter, because Victor, like so many others in Nevriska, would suffer the consequences of that mission regardless. Strada, while in the mining business, was also in the exploration business, delving ever deeper into the earth to study its composition, discover any secrets it might hold, and to set records. And so over the years, various missions had been conducted to do just that, with missions achieving a depth of 3,042 meters, 4,287 meters, 4,904 meters, and 6,482 meters in 1954, 1955, 1958, and 1960 respectively, with one last expedition occurring in 1964 according to a newspaper we find in Victor's apartment that reached an unknown depth. However, according to that same newspaper, the expedition ceased after 1964 due to destabilized bedrock and falling mineral prices, which highlights something nefarious about Strada, their negligence and hubris, as this newspaper clipping clearly states that their drilling didn't just end up becoming unprofitable, but also dangerous, to the point that it destabilized the very foundation of the soil they were drilling into. So another expedition like the previous ones would logically only amplify that danger exponentially. But unfortunately, before the penultimate mission Strada conducted occurred, renowned geologist Josip Hrtsenko would discover a new element, likely near the site of a previous expedition, an element that was dubbed Hertzentium. In the face of such a momentous discovery, Strada and the scientists they employed couldn't help but research this new element further, especially considering that the discovery of this element revealed the existence of a faint signal coming from somewhere deep within the earth. A signal that caused Hertzentium to react to it, and a discovery that no serious scientist could resist exploring further. That being said, there's likely another reason Strada felt the need to research Hertzentium and this signal further: pressure from the government. Because the Socialist People's Republic of Nevriska is based on the Soviet Union, it's reasonable to assume that the various corporations and conglomerates of Nevriska were at least partially state-owned, and because one of the hallmarks of the Cold War was the competition between the United States and the USSR as far as scientific accomplishments went, it's also reasonable to assume that the government of the SPRN were eager to add another accomplishment under their belt that they could tout in front of the world. The first nation to discover a new element and uncover the secrets of a mysterious signal lying somewhere deep in the earth. The deeper we go, the higher our nation stands, a quote attributed to the Nevriskan geonaut Alexei Petrov. Now, a notable example of such competition in our world is the space race. However, there were also several efforts made by the USSR to drill into the earth as deep as they possibly could, partly for legitimate scientific study, and partly to be the first to achieve the honor of drilling as far into the earth as they possibly could. The USSR's drilling wasn't done using massive drilling vessels, but regardless, it's more than likely that these drillings they conducted were a big inspiration for this game, as after Soviet scientists and engineers managed to delve to a depth of 12,262 meters on the Kola Peninsula, creating the Kola Super Deep Borehole, a rumor spread that they broke the barrier between our world and hell, which they supposedly confirmed by lowering a microphone into its depths and reportedly obtaining a recording of tormented screams, which coined the term well to hell in reference to the Kola Super Deep Borehole. Though that obviously didn't happen, that brings us to the veritable well to hell that Strada created. In April of 1979, Strada's aforementioned penultimate mission into the Earth would begin. A mission that was being planned as early as December of 1978, if Victor's enlistment letter is any indication. A mission to discover the source of the signal and the reason for Hertzentium's reaction to it. Report, April 3rd, 1979. We finally managed to pick up readings of the signal. It's weak, but it's definitively something there with its own signature. Good to know we didn't drill all this way for nothing. Report, April 5th, 1979. Almost thought we lost trace of signal. Have managed to obtain first samples of Hertzentium, which seems to be prominent at this depth, confirming predictions. Element is strange, seems to have debilitating effect on instruments if placed nearby. Everything just stops. Report, April 7th, 1979. Signal strength keeps rising the closer we get, like something's waking up. Not liking it one bit, but Surface Control asks us to keep going. They say we're going to make history. I just hope it's not the cautionary kind. Report, April 9th, 1979. Something is making us sick. Nausea, headaches, and wounds appearing seemingly out of nowhere. Radiation shield still at full capacity, so that's not it. Radiation sickness typically doesn't make you hear voices. We have requested evacuation. some things should clearly stay buried. Report. Date unknown. We have to cut the extraction cables. Thinking, talking getting difficult. There is something here with us. It must stay here. We must stay here. Just wish I remembered why. These are reports we find in the M12 when we finally make it to it towards the end of the game, where the vessel is stuck 3 meters away from the source of the signal. And while that date in the last report is unknown, we actually know when that date was, April 11th. We know this because there's a calendar across from 3 of these reports that has dates crossed out until the 11th, where there's just a line drawn through it, but also because we can reliably assume that this was the date that the Matryoshka incident occurred. The Matryoshka incident was an event where the entirety of Novriska experienced blackouts, electrical interference, and earthquakes that caused immense amounts of damage and death, as it caused fires that raged across towns and cities, with people also experiencing strange auditory hallucinations, like hearing the voices of dead loved ones. Now, how do we know that the date that the M12 nearly reached the source of the signal is the same date as the Matryoshka incident? Well, one of the newspaper clippings we find in the hospital talks about how Maria Demchenko, a senior representative of Strata, was summoned by the Directorate Board and questioned about a possible connection between the Matryoshka incident and the M12 mission. But more than that, we have the communications between Maria and Stepan Adamenko, the leader of the mission to discover the fate of the M12 after it's lost, and she states here that everything is riding on this mission, as it's the means to discover the source of all the strange phenomena unearthed by the previous mission that's wreaking havoc across the country and possibly the world. Furthermore, at the end of the game, Maria states that the final mission was always about damage control, all of which points to the notion that the previous mission's end was the catalyst for the Matryoshka incident. But there's something else that points to the end of the M12's mission and the Matryoshka incident occurring on the same date: the experiences of our protagonist, Victor. The Matryoshka incident brought great suffering to many citizens of Novriska, Victor included, as it was that day that Victor lost his son Petro. You have to go home right now. All landlines, electronics out of order. Fires throughout the city. Can't tell you confidential details. We have made a mistake I fear we cannot undo. This is a telegram Stepan sent to Victor, and on the day of the incident, Victor must have been at work, with his son at home at their apartment. Rushing home, Victor found that his apartment building was on fire, and after hurrying up flights of stairs to his home, he found his son Petro, burned beyond recognition and barely clinging to life, his entire world damaged beyond repair. Like so many at this time, Petro was rushed to the hospital, and while his body was utterly destroyed, doctors managed to preserve his life, leaving Petro encased in bandages and hooked up to life support systems with the hopes that one day his condition might improve. For nearly a year and a half, Petro was kept in this state, with his father refusing to give up on him, wishing to be the kind of father who tries, a father that does whatever he can to make sure his son is cared for, unlike his father was. So Victor kept Petro alive, that is until the day he finally lost hope and decided to sign Petro up for the Vostok Initiative. A sun that never sets. The light of consciousness is the most precious thing any citizen may own. Never let go. Have you lost someone? To lose a loved one is the deepest wound a person can carry. The world is cruel. We learn that far too early, but it does not have to end there. Through revolutionary neuroarchival technology, the Vostok Initiative offers a final chance to preserve what matters most. Using our state-of-the-art memory cassettes, a human consciousness can be transferred moments before biological death. A voice, a memory, a presence, preserved, so you never truly have to say goodbye. And perhaps, one day, you may even speak again. This is propagandized descriptions of the Vostok Initiative that we find on brochures and posters. And what the Vostok Initiative is a procedure that places a person's consciousness, or perhaps even their soul, in a cassette tape, so they and their memories might be preserved for all eternity. This process was discovered when researchers observed that at the moment of passing, the body loses exactly 21 grams of weight, and they theorized that this weight was the soul leaving the body. And in an effort to capture and preserve that soul, a method was devised that required a patient to be euthanized so the moment of one's passing and the recording of their soul onto a cassette could be synchronized. Against the advice of his dear friend Stepan Adamenko, who went through a similar experience when his wife Daria died, and advised against entertaining the Vostok Initiative in a letter he sent to Victor, on September 25, 1980, the date on an invoice for the Vostok Initiative he possessed, decided that it was time to let go of his son. But not entirely. And 30 days later, on October 25th, Victor would send over payment for this procedure, which was slated to be conducted the next day. So on October 26th, Petro's life would be ended and preserved on a Vostok cassette to be forever memorialized in memories both happy and sad. This is the horror that Victor had to witness, and the horror that Petro had to experience, with a father so desperately wishing to preserve the light of his life that he kept him in perpetual agony for over a year before encasing his soul in plastic, metal, and ribbon. Throughout this time, Victor would develop alcoholism while he battled with thoughts of ending his own life, and following his son's semi-permanent death, he would also earn the designation of criminal, for to pay for the Vostok initiative, Victor had to go in debt, which branded him a criminal in Navriska's eyes and made him subject to losing his citizenship. In order to prevent this from happening, Strada agreed to pull some strings for Victor if he signed up to be the navigator for their mission to discover the fate of the M12. And with nothing to keep him going aside from the immortalized version of his son, this time, he accepted their offer. So it was that in the beginning of November, Victor boarded the M13 alongside his colleagues Stepan Adamenko, Josip Hertsenko, and Bohdan Pusnik, with a falsified story that Hertsenko had recently discovered the signal, dubbed appropriately the White Rabbit signal, as the source of the Matroshka incident, being sent out to the public as a cover for Strada's previous research of the signal. This mission began, and in the beginning, things progressed normally, for a time. But soon enough, Stepan began to note the strange effects this signal was having on his crewmates in his journal. Bohdan. He's been losing teeth, which makes him even more irritable than usual. Other than that, the man seems to be keeping it together better than the rest of us, speculating it might be because he has a family waiting for him back home, something to keep him going. Victor. Effects of the White Rabbit seem to bring up bad memories, but that's to be expected. Was already self-medicating, but is functional. Remarkable that he's still one of the nation's best navigators even when half drunk. Still giving him some extra attention. Need him to know that he's not alone. Josip. Josip seems to be suffering the most among us, both from hallucinations and nightmares. He claims to be receiving instructions about the White Rabbit from a dead friend, which is never a good sign. Getting near impossible to communicate with him about anything other than the signal. As long as I've known him, he's always been obsessive about his work. This seems different. Perhaps he simply sees more than the rest of us. Stepan. Joints are acting up, eyesight seems to be deteriorating, and emptying the bladder is more difficult than I'm remembering it's ever been. What can be said? The White Rabbit seems to want to remind me of my age. She is there too, of course. She always is. Strange happenings aboard the M13, for all involved, and with Hertsenko becoming increasingly unhinged as he speaks to his dead friend through the signal, as we learn here and from the letter in his room, Plusnik growing more irritable as he continues to suffer physical harm to his person, and Stepan hearing his wife, suffering physical harm as well, and attempting to ease the mind of the ever more despondent and alcohol-ridden Victor, things start to look rather dire for the crew of the M13. But no one would have predicted just how dire things would actually get, or that it would be Victor who would end up sealing all of their fates. Intoxicated, miserable, and overcome with grief, Victor was likely a wreck the moment he set foot on the M13, and he only got worse, to the point that he began murdering his fellow crewmates. The engineer mistook mourning for madness. He couldn't fathom what truly defines a monster. This is the description on Bohdan's key that we're given after we wake up for the 4th time, and at the end of the game when Maria is reviewing the footage of the investigation the next team conducted, we learn that Bohdan was the first person Victor murdered, with the man who presented her the tapes remarking that there must have been something with Plusnik that really set Kaminsky off, that it's like he tried to rip his body apart. Indeed, when we discover Bohdan's body for the first time, we find him lying hunched over in the engine room with his stomach cut open and his entrails spilling out. But just prior to this, we received a call from Bohdan where he treats Victor rather poorly.
Чужаешь меня, Степан? Тут Bohdan, Witrów Brunei, Alaska. Виктор. Швейцарцы, че? Не кажи нищо, просто закняня. Я казав, ям за малко пожалит. Я казав, се не перевести. Я казав, се не обляща Степанови. И прюго нашата мисию, а помолила заредния. Ти от рота, Виктор. Отечил ти таке. Ти сидиш там в своей кабине, сважно шоко да la контролиеш. Коло едеш рверно, корба пекли тувниция. Трина шека в меня. Милианы виря шека на меня. Mnie się szoku vracti. A tiede jedziesz tu na mną, likiš namni kesärmismistja. Ja piano tulossa vitryvieno blokke. Signateriven. Ja spurgju jobben satnanja. Mi bzjetju përmjeno. I pëciomnja om ju bzjetji. Psatkem sidje ju kumli tobini, kudih tas i vrlo. A vyšlak ja tam. Ja i prudjona kom pachora. Tobice šle dobre veca.
Suffice it to say that Bodon likely despised Victor and what he perceived as weakness and madness, becoming increasingly hostile to him until Victor finally decided to end his hostility for good in the most vicious way possible. If the communication between Maria and Stepan we find on Stepan's computer is any indicator, this murder occurred on November 8th, with Maria telling Stepan that he knew what to expect going into this mission and that such an event should come as no surprise. But despite the fact that a murder just occurred aboard this vessel, Maria convinces Stepan that extraction is impossible, as there is too much at stake here to end this mission early. So they continue on, but that night, Victor would murder again, with the victim this time being Josip Hirtsenko, the man who put all these events in motion with his discovery of his eponymous element. And we know that he must have been murdered on that same day, as it's on the very next day, November 9th. Wait, November 9th? That's my birthday. Anyway, it's the very next day that the story of Mole begins. The game opens with someone explaining the White Rabbit signal to us and showing us the otherworldly vision it gives to people if they stare at the waveform it generates, after which we're taken to a dream of a field of tall grass with a tree in the distance, the tree that you once visited with your son that he wanted to hang a rope swing from. And once we make it to that tree, we discover that there is no rope swing, only the grave of one Petro Kaminsky surrounded by pink flowers. After digging into the grave, we find Petro's Vostok cassette, and after we obtain it, we wake from Victor's latest nightmare and find ourselves in his room aboard the M13. But from here, everything we experience might as well be a dream, as though what we go through over the course of this story is indeed real. It's intermixed with visions and hallucinations Victor experiences due to the influence of the White Rabbit signal. Our first hallucination shows up rather quickly as we make our way out of our room, where we find one of the computer screens that displays the date, flashing between the current date and the date of the Matroshka incident, April 11th, 1979, our first indicator that something isn't quite right aboard the M13. If we head over to the nearby water closet, we find teeth in the sink, which we can only assume came from the mouth of Bodon Plusnik. But it's not the flashing date nor the teeth that are most concerning here. For after we read a message from Maria urging us to get the M13 back on course after it stalled due to the previous day's events, we head down to the rec room and find the body of Dr. Hirtsenko lying face down with gouges in his back and a nearby screwdriver for the murder weapon. After we make it to the deck, we're shown another hallucination, a path of familiar flowers leading us to a hallway, the hallway that contains the portraits of past geonauts I mentioned earlier, with it ending in the classroom where Victor began studying to become a geonaut back in 1961. When we first enter the classroom, it's morning time, but if you head back to examine the instructions again, you'll find that it's night now, which is likely a nod to the fact that Victor's bright days as a wide-eyed student were in hindsight the beginning of the darkest days of his life. After we get the M13 back on course, we exit the cockpit to find the phone in Stepan's office ringing, and the person on the other end is Dr. Hirtsenko, who tells us that we're on the verge of discovering something extraordinary and that he needs to show us something. But Hirtsenko is dead on the floor in the rec room. There's no possible way this could be him calling. Right? Right. It isn't him. This is another hallucination, likely of the conversation that Victor and Josip had just before he killed him. And after being warned by various computer screens of impending danger, we're chased by a terrifying creature towards the decks and through a path of flowers before ending up in a bathroom. This bathroom ends up being the bathroom in our own apartment, or more appropriately, a memory of the bathroom in our own apartment. And after we're instructed by a strange and mysterious voice to take the cassette of our son's memories over to the TV, we're greeted by a terrifying illusion of an eye, the source of the voice, a voice that tells us that our son still lies asleep somewhere in the static, that the past lies buried down here, but it doesn't have to be set in stone, that our son can still be saved, and that it can help us find what we seek, and that in the end, perhaps it will provide both of us with redemption. After we witness this memory, we wake up once again in our dorm on a new day, And after finding a new yet old letter on the desk from Stepan that was written before we decided to purchase the Vostok initiative, we exit to find that Yosip's room is now open, and Yosip is now lying there against his bed with his throat cut. But how can this be? Is this another hallucination? Yes, it is. And something you may have been asking up until this point is how we know that a lot of what we experience in this story is the result of Victor's hallucinations. And the answer to that is because at the end of the game, we see through the tapes of the investigation that Strata conducted that the body of Yosip is in the exact same spot that it was when we first found it, among other things that we'll get to in a moment. But more than that, when you look back at everything that we experience in this game, we see that though the majority of the strange phenomena we witness are indeed hallucinations, these hallucinations are all based on something very specific, our own memories. And if anything we see or hear isn't, it's a creation of the entity that's living within the signal, that's built with our memories, an entity that was very real and who was manipulating us from the start. The past is buried down here, Victor, and there couldn't be more truth to that statement. When we enter Yosip's room, we find a letter he wrote to a friend that has since passed, where he talks about the signal and how this friend of his told him to interpret the signal as brainwaves. Brainwaves. This signal, while electronic in nature, is electronic in the sense that it emanates from the electrical impulses of the brain, the power of an extraordinarily complex and fathomless mind lying somewhere deep in the earth that has been attempting to communicate with mankind, even as it unleashes great destruction on us, influencing our minds by manipulating our memories, as its power corrupts our body. But why? Why is this entity unleashing such chaos on the world? Because it wants to be free, and it needs the appropriate vessel to obtain that freedom. Even before we met this entity, we're told of its power and its fate, more subtle nods meant to guide us towards the being that had been calling to us all this time. Throne 13, verses 18 through 19. And the angel spoke, "The earth shall give up those who are asleep in it. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain." Throne chapter 7, verse 32. And an angel descended upon the earth, and wiped every tear from their eyes. Throne chapter 19, verses 11 through 12. And the wicked rejected the angel's mercy. Instead they cast the angel deep down below the earth, and there they bound the angel in a prison of stone. An angel descended onto the earth. The first witness lay wrapped in swaddling cloth. The angel taught truth and secrets. Only she truly understood. All flesh withers. Some flowers are cut before they can bloom. The people mourn the ways of the world. The angel refused the cruelty of fate. He shattered the boundaries between life and death. They feared a world unaligned with the tyranny of their dogma. Thus the angel was condemned and cast down. The angel was imprisoned beneath the earth. The knowledge he had given them became his chains. This is the creature that has been calling to us, to everyone, an angel deep beneath the surface of the earth who was imprisoned by man long ago for unleashing unholy powers onto us that broke the barrier between life and death. A terrifying sight to behold that appears as an echo of what biblically accurate angels are supposed to look like. Or is it? A moment ago we discussed how nearly every strange thing we experience in this story is derived from our own memories. More often than not, our negative memories surrounding what we've done to our crewmates or how we failed our son. But strewn throughout these memories, as well as our own quarters in our cockpit in the real world, is something else, something very prominent that appears almost everywhere we go. Religion. One of the first things we see after we wake up in this story are Orthodox crosses on our wall and a Holy Bible with the Orthodox cross on our desk. And as we continue to move through this story, we frequently encounter various religious iconography, whether that be the portrait of a saint in our cockpit or in the various paintings we find as we progress through this story. But what, if anything, do these details have to do with this story? Well, what this tells us initially is that Victor is a deeply religious man, so much so that even after his son's death, he still clung to his faith to the point that he felt the need to bring a Bible as well as several other religious items with him on his journey. Why this matters is because everything that we're exposed to in this story could all easily be a ruse, manipulation by an entity looking to free itself, who has used the memories and beliefs of our protagonist to maneuver him exactly the way it needs to free it. Whenever we're shown any of Victor's terrible memories, they're rife with melancholy and despair, but more importantly, shame and guilt. You are a man who feels responsible for your son's fate in every way. You feel responsible for his burning because you weren't there to save him. You feel responsible for his suffering because you tried so hard to save him after the fact. You feel responsible for imprisoning his soul in a cassette to preserve his memory, to save your own feelings. and all of this has instilled within you so much overwhelming guilt that at various points since Petro's burning, you have fantasized about taking your own life. All of this shame that you've internalized is present within these memories we witness, which is not only seen through the memories themselves, but with what appears in those memories, like in the hospital, where we see the famous painting of Saturn devouring his son by Francisco Goya hung up outside the door that leads to the memory of your burning apartment, or in Petro's hospital room, where, when I first played the game, there was the painting Ivan the Terrible and his son by Ilya Repin, which depicts Ivan the Terrible's sorrow after he accidentally murdered his son. Furthermore, the monster that we frequently encounter throughout this game is not a monster at all, but your own guilt made manifest. When we first see this monster, it emerges from Yosip's room after we get a call from him, the monstrous Yosip chasing us down to punish us for our sins. Next time, it's after we find Bodan, who chases us for similar reasons. Then we see it next coming out of the body of our son, chasing us through the memory of the hospital and our home. And finally, the last time we see this monster is in front of the M13's exit, the very spot where, at the end of the game, we see the murdered Stepan Adamenko lying dead. But here in the hospital, we also find hope, a guiding hand, an angel leading his shepherd, for it's here that we find an etching of the painting The Angel Appearing to the Shepherds by Rembrandt, a nod before we ever meet the angel that we're being guided by some holy entity that's leading us toward our salvation. What all of this is, all of this shame, guilt, and the hope that we're being guided for the sake of seeing our son again, are all things designed by this entity to lead us to it so it could obtain its freedom. For like Petro, it was trapped in static, trapped in the void between worlds, where it could only be reached through the element it brought to the people to teach them its secrets. And in order to free itself, it needs a disembodied soul that is also trapped in similar static to latch onto, the soul of Petro. That's why the M12, though it nearly reached this entity, did not contain what it needed to free it. And that's why, ever since the fire, this entity has been manipulating us into doing what it needs to free itself. It has been capable of speaking to people through their memories ever since it was unleashed, and so it has been manipulating Victor into doing exactly what it needed him to do, obtain a Vostok Initiative cassette that was the key to its freedom, a key that could only be held by the best navigator in the world, a navigator who could reach it and finally unlock its cage. When we enter the church and greet this entity for the first time, we see that there are several paintings strewn throughout this cathedral, and after attempting to find out what each of these paintings were, I managed to discover the origins of two of them. This one, showing the face of an old man, is a cutout of Caravaggio's The Sacrifice of Isaac, a painting depicting a man sacrificing his child for his God. This one is a cutout of Saint Sebastian by Guido Reni, which depicts the martyr Saint Sebastian, who was murdered during the Diocletianic persecution. I couldn't identify what these other two paintings were, nor the other portraits that appear around the cathedral, so if you know, please let us know down in the comments. But I think it's safe to assume that they too have to do with sacrifice and martyrdom, for that's what this angel has influenced you into doing and what it has commanded you become. A man who sacrifices his son and martyrs himself for the sake of his Lord, his latest and final Lord, this lost and long forgotten angel. But again, everything that we're shown here could be deception, images taken straight from our memory to lull us into a false sense of security so that we would put all our faith and all our trust into this being, a being who, while appearing as a biblically accurate angel, also appears with a face that's taken straight from the religious icon, the jaw of St. Anthony, whose mouth was preserved as a relic because he reportedly had an incorruptible tongue, with this angel also posing as Jesus does in various portraits of him. Another potential act of deception intended to convince Victor that this angel can do no wrong and is only a benevolent entity looking to release him and itself from their torment. But what is this creature really? Given all that we're shown in this game, can we really know for certain what this thing actually is? No, we can't, but I think there are three possibilities that all have their merit, and while any of them could be more or less true, I'm certain that at least one of them is. The first possibility is that yes, this is indeed a lost angel, a fallen one that tried to bridge the gap between life and death for the sake of mankind, but who was cast down for doing so as an abomination by early Christians after they watched him save the life of the first woman he encountered, the only woman who understood him, and a woman that he loved. Now this is only a possibility, but I'm almost certain that this woman was actually Saint Barbara, an early Christian saint and martyr who is known in the Eastern Orthodox Church as the Great Martyr Barbara, a woman who is the patroness saint of many different professionals, but most importantly, of minors, and more importantly than that, a woman who was martyred after she was imprisoned by her father and beheaded by him for her faith. And the reason that I'm so sure that this is who this is supposed to be is because Victor has a portrait of St. Barbara in his cockpit, and the woman depicted in these etchings that open the church looks rather similar to this rendition of her. Now the thing is though, even if this is supposed to be St. Barbara and some unknown angel who taught her its secrets, it might not actually be her, as again, this could all very well be one elaborate performance that's meant to lure Victor into freeing this being, as another possibility is that this is a malevolent entity using the story of St. Barbara as a vehicle to create this fictionalized version of her martyrdom by painting itself as an angel who revealed its truth to her as a means to possess Victor's son and wreak havoc on humanity. Perhaps signifying for us that what we actually encounter is a demon, or even the devil himself, who has put on this guise to deceive Victor into believing he is a virtuous angel looking to save him. Further evidence for this could be found in this entity's last line to us, where it states that it will never be able to let go, and perhaps it's referring to Earth and mankind as a whole here, for in some stories, Satan is said to be the ruler of the Earth, and that Earth is his domain, a domain that he, if this theory is true, does not want to relinquish his claim over. The other possible identity of this entity is that of St. Barbara herself, and that there never was an angel, but rather there was a woman who discovered a source of great power after she stumbled upon Hercentium long ago, and following her attempts to use that power to bridge the gap between life and death, she was cast down into the depths by the people she exposed this power to as an abomination whose actions were nothing short of heresy. And aside from the fact that everything we witness here could all be an elaborate act of manipulation, there are a few other things that point to this being a possibility. One is the fact that we discover the skeleton of this woman once we go down the rabbit hole, implying that she was a real person. Another is this angel's admission that it doesn't remember her name anymore, which could be her padding the story she concocted to lure Victor in, while simultaneously admitting she doesn't remember her own name. Another is the fact that in the church, there are banners depicting a dark-haired woman with a dark-haired child in front of her, which I initially thought could be the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, but it could also be a subtle nod to the fact that this woman is trying to merge with Petro's soul to free her from her prison. The last thing that might support this theory is the fact that on the M12, we find the sentence, "She wants us to keep digging," on a chalkboard, which could be referring to Maria, the overseer of the mission. Or it could be a nod to the idea that it was this woman, possibly St. Barbara, who was urging these people to dig this entire time. Though it's also possible that this woman wasn't St. Barbara, but actually some sort of very powerful witch who made a pact with a demon that is using the story of St. Barbara to lure in Victor in much the same way that the devil might have. While any of these theories could be correct, whatever this entity's identity is, their goals are all the same. Revenge. Revenge against mankind for imprisoning it. When we finally free this so-called angel by merging it with Petro's soul, we're shown that Victor is given everything that this entity promised him. A world where Petro is still alive, and the horrid events that caused his death are nothing but a bad memory. A personal heaven that, while seeming to be blissful, may or may not be yet another deception that this creature has instilled within our mind as we're experiencing our final moments of death. For just prior to seeing this vision, we're pierced with Hercentium much like the crew of the M12 were. A momentary reward for the agony he suffered as a result of this creature's wish to be free. But afterwards, when Maria puts Petro's cassette into her computer, we're shown this entity finally being let free, unleashed upon the world once again. And after it's gained its freedom, it destroys everything. The entire world rendered ruins and rubble as the wrath of a being that should have never been freed, and perhaps never been imprisoned, washes over the world. And though the game cuts out here, if you return to the main menu, you find Maria's computer still standing, and a countdown that never completes below the words, "Days until salvation." But salvation will never come, because salvation is what this entity may have brought us to begin with, but no longer. All that it had left was fury, descending the world into a perpetual state of madness and chaos, and ensuring that it would remain broken, ever awaiting a salvation that will never arrive. And out of all the possibilities for this entity's origin that we just discussed, here at the end, we're shown that it perhaps truly was an angel, and that it perhaps truly fell in love with a woman, the only woman who ever understood it. For as this computer loads this angel's data into its mainframe, we're shown several images that are precluded by tags. Altar, fire, execution, feathered entity, ascension rite, burning church, mind revival, divine punishment, throne, mass grave, choir, unknown saint, open ribcage, heaven gate, fall, 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 designation, archangel, exiled, unwanted, buried, alive. Text is shown saying displaying historical records, with a number of years appearing. before more ominous text scrolls across the screen. They called us angels. They fed us fire. They cut our throats. They lowered us into the earth. They listened to us scream. They listened. They listened. They listened. They prayed for ascension. They received us instead. More images appear, and more tags with them. 1,000 eyes, open mouths, stone angel, empty sky, black feathers, chained figures, ascension engine, vertical chamber, fire altar, burning sea, white mask, mutilated choir, starving saint, falling light, unblinking face. And as these words fade, and they're overtaken by the eye of this entity, we're shown one final possibility, that this church we walked into was once truly a church dedicated to this unholy angel, an unholy angel whose first prophet was a saint, a woman who had loved more than anything else, and who it gave everything to prevent her from dying. And here beneath the earth it was cast down with its congregation, imprisoned, waiting, biding its time, and building its power that was no longer holy, but unholy, and waiting to unleash itself upon the world. So it was that Victor Kaminsky, a man who lived his life toiling in a profession he despised, that he was pushed into pursuing by his father, a man who lost his wife and then lost his son, became a martyr to this being who may or may not have once been benevolent, but who now was no longer, sacrificing himself and his son for the sake of its revenge, in a desperate attempt to absolve himself of his perceived sins. But Victor was also a martyr for Strahta, and so was his son, who perished due to the hubris of Strahta and the nesting doll they unleashed that contained only ever more horrors as they continued to peel back its layers. For that is what Matryoshka means in Russian. And after causing all this death, they made Victor into a man who was slated to be the patsy for their failures should he return to the surface. For working in concert with the angel's manipulation of Victor was Strahta and the government's manipulation of him, plunging a man who was in debt for wishing to save his son into the depths of the earth in order to absolve him of his sins, but only doing so to use him for his talents and his potential usefulness as a martyr for their cause, a cause that may or may not have always been controlled by an entity who has been imprisoned for hundreds of years and who over many years made many attempts to free itself, with its victory finally being achieved through the hands of Victor, a man who was ultimately punished for his faith in his father, faith in his country, in his company, and faith in his God. For what truly makes a monster is desperation. And so in his desperation, down the rabbit hole he went, chasing that white rabbit, grasping for relief from his pain, but in the end, finding one thing, and one thing only: horror beyond comprehension, despair beyond reckoning, and an evil far beyond our power to control. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Mole? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and especially our Dark Lord patrons, Elijah Kai VA, Mr. Awesome, Louis Dockstater, Just Keeping It Real, Lachlan, Atris Rain, Celsopa, Him Downstairs, Off Mega, Beep Boop, Lorenzo Antonino, and Eli Livingston. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.